Welcome to the Contrarian Capitalist podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by the excellent Brawl Street Journal. Brawlster, how are you doing this morning?
I'm fine, thank you.
Great to have you here. Plenty to talk about today, and I imagine that most people wouldn't expect us to start with Denmark and Norway. We're going to be looking a lot at the EU energy policies and things to do with China and chips and all these sorts of things today. And the reason I want to start with Denmark and Norway is that in a recent article that you released, Denmark has accused Norway of profiteering with regards to the energy industry. So why would they do that, and what's been going on?
So it obviously has to do with the conflict in Ukraine, and Denmark is accusing Norway of not having helped Ukraine enough in the conflict. And so they say that Norway profited from the high energy prices in 2022 and 23. But those energy prices were obviously caused by the Western sanctions against Russian energy. So calling your sole supplier or one of your few suppliers left war profiteers while you cut off another supplier is, of course, a bit rich. And Denmark, well, of course, the entire EU is really wants to keep that conflict going. And Denmark might have some contracts with regards to defense, which they want to see fulfilled, which might explain in turn why they want to tap into Norway's energy profits.
I find it certainly from a UK point of view, because I know that there's some challenges that the UK has with energy policy at the moment as well. And one of those things comes down to North Sea oil, where Britain has, or the United Kingdom has the ability to go in and do what they need to do to extract it, but because of various energy reasons, they won't. And yet we continue to pay or add to the Norwegian fund as well. So it's interesting that the UK is not accused Norway of profiteering, but Denmark has. Uh, I mean, I've read through your article and I'll link to it in the notes as well. I don't think Norway's done anything wrong here. It just seems to be a bit of political maneuvering. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Norway wouldn't complain with Denmark in case prices would go down. It's just entrepreneurial risk. And if you deliver a scarce good and prices go up, then it's totally normal to profit from that price increase because you also accept the downside when it comes. Um, and the it's just so the entire setup is also because Ukraine is sliding into bankruptcy next March, and so Europe's leaders are desperately looking for solutions to avert this bankruptcy. And so you have these 140 billion Russian sovereign reserve sitting at Euroclear, and the use, of course, coming up with all kinds of legal contraptions to use those assets in a legal quote unquote way. And so Denmark's idea is to tap into Norway's funds so that they back these loans in case something goes all right.
Yeah, it's a lot going on to say the least, and it doesn't sit quite well with me, and I'm sure it won't sit quite well with many people listening to this as well. But interestingly, in Norway, Norway's finance minister is a gentleman called Jens Stoltenberg. I think I've pronounced that right. But he's also the former NATO Secretary General. So there's other things at play here when there shouldn't be, and I think that's going to have a big impact on any decision making moving forward.
Yeah, so the rather left government was confirmed in the last elections in Norway, and you with people like Stoltenberg, you can really see how their allegiance is not so much with their home country, but with this certain transatlantist thinking and also this kind of idealist thinking. So he carried his conviction as a former NATO Secretary General to his role as Norway's finance minister. And this is a really nice example of how Europe's elites don't really follow this realist conception of international law, where each state does what it's for its best own benefit within the boundaries of its power. So these allegiances are more alongside these transatlantic thinkings, and NATO is the prime example of this whole architecture.
Totally agree. It's something that we've highlighted before, and I get a lot of pushback on the channel whenever I highlight that a lot of what we've seen in the last 20 or 30 years is more than likely down to NATO aggression rather than the other side of the argument. I always get pushback on that, but I'll leave people to form their own judgments. Um, so, given your research and given your writings, then, and given the links now that we've established between Norway's finance minister, their wealth fund and NATO, how do you think this is going to play out moving forwards?
So I think it's only a question of when, not if, that Stoltenberg will in fact use these funds as collateral. So their fund is rather big. It's 1.8 trillion euros, but still 140 billion is almost 10% of that. So if you back this kind of money, then it's definitely a risk, and it's money that belongs to Norway's pensioners. The way this will really play out probably depends on how long the conflict will last. And again, Ukraine is facing bankruptcy by the end of March. And what I wrote in this piece, so I made the argument that Russia is intensifying its attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, and this could bring the conflict to an abrupt halt. Because if you have millions of people living in a centralized way, mostly in urban areas, you just need a couple of days for these places to become ungovernable. And Zelensky is already engaging in a lot of lawfare against opponents within Ukraine, which goes to show that his position is not really this stable. So the Norway's funds might not be touched because the conflict ends sooner, but that's just my prediction, my assessment.
Fair enough. Now, I would say that for anyone listening in a NATO country or EU country, whatever it might be, don't expect your country to get any funds back that you might have sent Ukraine. This is also a political hot potato we have in the UK as well, where X amount of millions and billions that are going out to help shore up Ukraine. But as you just said, they're a lot closer to bankruptcy than people think they are. And then the odds of those lending countries getting anything back is, in my eyes, very minimal. Of course, unless the printing presses fire up, which we will see what happens. Brewster, just keeping on Ukraine's energy system, because I know you've put a fantastic chart in here, and I want to try and keep this as rather than talk about taking sides between Russia and Ukraine, and I want to try and avoid that. Let's try and focus on the energy. So there's been a lot of attacks between, I'm just going to say Russia and Ukraine. I know there's other forces behind the scenes that are doing, some of the attacking. But in terms of energy infrastructure, so you had a fantastic chart, and apparently electricity generation by fuel in 2024 in Ukraine, just over half was nuclear, but Russia doesn't seem to have properly taken out nuclear facilities in Ukraine. There's going to be a good reason for that. You could think Chernobyl back in 1986 and other reasons as well. So again, is there an end game here with regards to energy and what's going on within that energy infrastructure in Ukraine?
So if you see how the conflict developed, Russia always attacked the energy infrastructure, but you I mean, there's always the fog of war, and truth is always the first casualty of war. So it's hard to tell what's propaganda. I mean, it's always propaganda, but it's hard to tell what the facts on the ground are. But Russia did conduct these attacks all the time. At the same time, the Ukrainians did an incredible job of rebuilding this infrastructure, also with a lot of help from the West. So they got a lot of substations and transformers from Western country. So in fact, there's now even a transformer shortage going on, also because of this. And you can probably make the argument that Russia l- limited those attacks to put pressure on the Ukrainian government and to maybe force surrender or some kind of peace deal. And now they see that this is not working, that the Ukrainian government won't give in. And now they are intensifying these attacks to such an extent that it will be very hard for Ukraine to uphold the functioning of its energy infrastructure. And in the long run, uh, uh, it's, the eastern part of the Ukraine will fall to Russia. So, and the western part will probably in the long run uh, uh, be, join the EU. So Russia does not have the interest to totally destroy, to make this territory totally unlivable. So that plays a role as well. And again, I'm not taking sides like you said. I'm just trying to assess what's happening and what's the most likely outcome, totally detached from what I think is a good or bad outcome. I just see what data is out there and try to connect the dots in a way that tries to ignore all kind of emotional or judgmental feelings from what I think is fair or unfair.
I totally agree, Brewster. It's easier said than done, and it's important to say that yeah, we're in this particular recording. We'll try and keep as neutral as possible. Look at what's happening, and then look at everything from that point of view. As I say, it's very easy to upset um, the sides when it comes to anything. I think at the moment, but that's a different conversation in itself. I just want to go back to the last thing that you mentioned about the concentration of where Ukrainians live. So a lot of them, and it's a high percentage, maybe 70% or more, do live in do live in cities. So with regards to energy, what that means is that should Russia concentrate attacks on energy infrastructure a bit more, then because of, again, we're recording this on the 11th of November, it's going to get cold. It's probably got colder, but it's likely going to get more colder as well. My point being that if the energy infrastructure is taken out, it's only going to take a couple of days for people to be without, water, gas, electricity before, I don't want to say looting can happen, but you know what I mean, before things could get quite a lot worse for the citizens living in those cities.
Yeah, it's a total tragedy, and it reinforces the pattern during the last winters of war. So Russia always intensified these energy infrastructure attacks around winter because then they're the most painful. And we've seen in the war in 1999, the NATO war against Serbia, that they essentially employed the same tactics. So they left Serbia without power for prolonged time, and that contributed to the disintegration of that regime. Um, and this thinking isn't really part of the mainstream analysis, but if you really break it down to what people want, and they want a warm place to stay. They need food. They need to get to where they
Mhm.
go to. So it really boils down to that energy aspect. And I think this is a really big lever Russia can use now. And again, they also declared it as their military political objective. So in the past, they framed these attacks as retaliatory or as pressure. But this shift in phrasing really signals that the energy infrastructure attacks are are getting a key are becoming a key part of Russia's efforts to end this war to its advantage.
Well, we will certainly see what happens, and I think that the other key point that you've already mentioned, and it's important to mention again, is that as of March 2026, if things carry on as they are, Ukraine will be bankrupt. So that is going to send, financial shockwaves, I think, around anyone within, the EU area in general. Paul, so just before we head on to another article that I'd like to go over, let's keep on energy at the moment. I know that nuclear facilities in Germany keep getting destroyed. We've got pipelines being turned off, et cetera, all being destroyed. It seems as though the EU is hell bent on just destroying itself. Um, what are, what are your thoughts on that? And is there anything else that you've seen that you'd like to add to the energy conversation before we move on to China?
So I think this really ties back into this lack of realist thinking that EU elites have. So they came of age during the Cold War and a little bit later when there was just essentially a unipolar world with the US. So they got their training in these think tanks, fellowships and scholarships that really focused on the Atlanticism. And at the same time, they also pursue this idealist view of the world where they believe you just have to uphold the right values, democracy, rule of law, uh, human rights, which is of course totally fine, but you can only project these laws on the world if you can back them with power. And Europe lacks this power. And so essentially they're running an operating system that no longer applies to the world. And it's the same, in my view, this also explains why Europe keeps shooting itself in the foot with regards to its energy policies, because they believe that you just have to lead with example and show the world how this so-called energy transition works really well, and then everyone will follow you. But the problem with that is, of course, that it doesn't work at all.
Mhm.
So Europe is deindustrializing. Germany has extremely high electricity costs, and industry doesn't run on virtue signaling. They compete with China, they compete with the rest of the world. Um, and in Germany, you essentially have this, even though the Green Party is not in power anymore, the same kind of thinking is still pervading the political decisions and the public discourse. So it's totally detached from physical reality. They believe that if you save the fossil fuel cost, that you somehow magically get this cheap energy,
Mm.
which sounds intuitive because, yes, sun and wind are free, but of course, integrating sun and wind into the system is gr grows disproportionately with the capacity that you install. But these physical realities get totally ignored in the public discourse. And so they all have this virtue signaling and upholding these moral values um, because of their idealist view of the world, which is not realist, which is not doing what's best for their countries.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I know that we've seen in the last few days in the UK where President Trump is actually threatening to sue the main broadcaster, the BBC, because of tampering with video footage in order to make it look like President Trump was inciting the J6 riots. Now, I'm not going to go into the politics of that, but the fact that he is even threatening a major broadcasting corporation or the British Broadcasting Corporation, I think that says everything that you need to know with what you've just said about, the propaganda levels that we are facing at the moment.
Yeah, it's absolutely the same with German's public broadcasting station. They or we have the most expensive broadcasting network in the world, actually, and it's the quality is super lopsided and it's super bad actually. So all this stuff wouldn't survive if it was on the open market, like on Substack. So that's really the difference between what we do and what they do. So they just have to show lines to the political leaders and to the political flavor of the day, and they don't have to survive on the marketplace of ideas. And you're really forced to deliver content in a high quality if you want to survive on the market. And these people don't have to do that; they get their money regardless. So you, it's no wonder people ask to abolish these institutions.
100%. And let's just say that, that cash that they receive is likely funded by either the state or the taxpayer or a combination of both. So again, it's almost like it's a self-serving prophecy, but in a very negative way.
Yes, absolutely. It's actually a huge scandal, and it's more expensive than I think than a Netflix subscription, for example, and you can't cancel it. So it's it's this huge industry, and it's actually similar to the green tech industry. It's
Mm.
also this huge wealth redistribution system. So they can go and say, we save the world. That's why you have to give us money. And if you don't do that, then the apocalypse will come. And these broadcasting stations, they're essentially doing the same. They say, if you don't give us money, then all these bad social networks will take over and democracy will die because you will only get disinformation and so on.
Well, talking of democracy, I see that our mutual friend Doomberg put on his Substack recently, and this came from the Financial Times, I should say, and it's the Ursula von der Leyen apparently is looking to set up a new intelligence unit within the EU. I'm pretty sure that's not going to end very well at all. I don't know if you've got any thoughts from that there from Doomberg.
I haven't, I've seen the headline as well. I haven't read the details yet, but I assume this intelligence agency will be mostly focused on internal affairs, on thought crime against the EU and its leaders. So it sounds like that they're establishing institutions that will protect those who keep clinging onto power.
Yes, as I just quote the subtitle from the Financial Times and quote, body to collate material from national agencies and improve its operational use, end quote. So yeah, we will see what happens with that. To me, it just seems like adding fuel to the fire, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Moving on then, and I said rather than let's not go down, the political path there. What I would say is that, and I said this to Doomberg as well and other people, that it seems to be that if you sat down with people anywhere around the world and you say to them, look, we would like a greener environment, I think most people would agree with that. I think most people would say, yeah, absolutely. Let's make the air cleaner. Let's have a greener environment. So we've got point A, which is where we are now. And we've got point B, which is the end goal, a greener world. I think everyone would agree that that's what would like they would like to happen. The point being is you can get there in two different ways, and you can take from an energy point of view, you can take a step back and then take two steps forward. We see this in Chinese emissions. If you look at the amount of coal plants that are going, and you just look at that chart, like I know you have done uh, in your writings. If you just focus on the coal and the emissions from coal in China, the chart looks horrible. Absolutely, it does. But you then look at their nuclear production and how that's also advanced significantly. Then my point being that to get from A to B, you can take two paths, a good path, which would be one step backwards, so maybe more emissions, two steps forward, more nuclear, etc. Or you can take the other path, which is, well, let's just deindustrialize, like you were saying about Germany and so forth earlier. But of course, that's going to create a lot of, well, it is creating a lot of social issues as well. And I always wonder then, at what point do people start putting the dots together when they realize that there might be, should we say, higher forces at play as to why it seems it's just Europe that's going down this route. Doesn't seem to make sense to me. And I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that at all, Brewster.
I think the problem is that in the short run, there are lots of people who can hijack these noble goals actually and make a lot of money out of that. So I actually used to work in an international law firm that
Mhm.
focused on all kinds of green energy projects, on offshore wind farms, on these transactions and financing these projects. And I can tell you that back then, and it's still the same today, they just focus on installed capacity. They don't focus on, does this actually work? I mean, it would be great if it would work, if wind and solar could replace coal and nuclear, and we could all live happily. And if only those fossil fuel conspiracists wouldn't exist.
Mhm.
But again, it doesn't work. And but this message is so counterintuitive to say that you need to have you need to invest in this rather complicated technology, which is nuclear. And the wind and sun, yes, they are free, but they are free at times when you don't need them. And at night, you don't have sun, and sometimes you don't have wind. So what do you want to do? Do you want to shut down hospitals at night? Do you not want to have surgeries at night? Should traffic lights go down at night because you don't have any sun or wind? So I think it's really easy to hijack this narrative for quick profiteering. And again, in this law firm, those people felt great about themselves. They told themselves, "Yeah, we're helping people to save the climate." And only when I was so that was at the beginning of my career, but
Mhm.
only when I went to a conference and one engineer actually explained this very simple fact to me that, yeah, but you need to store that energy. Installing all this capacity is nonsense if it goes to waste. Um, and you're so deep into your silo. So I'm a trained lawyer, and I'm not an engineer. So this really simple fact isn't really on people's radar. It's really hard to cut through this narrative, which is also one reason why I read the Broad Street Journal, because there's so much misleading information out there that even highly intelligent people don't really grasp how wrong it is and how
Mhm.
it's unworkable. So that's why I believe we're going down this wrong path, and why as an end result, Europe is deindustrializing. China um, i- is building one coal plant after another, and nothing changes with regards to the emissions if you net everything.
Absolutely, yes. It just offsets each other and then some, which again, yeah, there's so many points to tackle there. First of all, and I think I really recommend yourself anyway. If not, I'll make sure I do that recommendation because yeah, I thoroughly enjoy reading your work, and it's also the important reason why we do these podcasts is to have conversations, with people like yourself, Brewster, and just have a chat, talk about what's going on. Try not to bring our own emotions into it, and just look at statement of fact, and to bring that truth to people as well. So yeah, I want to thank you again for taking your time today, for being part of the conversation. Just want to reference the another article you wrote at the start of November, and again on the theme of China. Obviously, I know there's been a lot of conversations with rare uh, rare earth controls and all these sorts of things. But Volkswagen has said that some of the chips that they buy or get from China went up from 3 cents to €1.50, which is, as you point out, it's a 50%, sorry, not 50%, sorry, a 50 times price increase. crazy stuff. But this all comes after the Dutch authorities seized control of chip maker Nexperia. So Beijing retaliated. So again, if we can, let's try and link in some trade, maybe a bit of energy, and also, rare earths. Again, this just seems like another move of someone within the EU shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, and again, I think once again it ties back to the Atlanticism of Europe's leaders. So the Dutch authorities seized the control because they adhered or they complied with U.S. sanctions, with the U.S. sanctions list. So they were forced, according to U.S. law, to seize control because more than 50% of the Nexperia, the Dutch Nexperia branch was owned by a Chinese entity. So instead of thinking, how will this play out? What will the second order consequences will be? They just blindly followed those rules
Mm.
and and again shoot themselves in the foot. Because of course China has more leverage than Europe. They built up their rare earths refining capacity over the decades, and now people wake up and notice how dependent everything is on these chips. So Volkswagen's production lines can come easily to a halt if they suffer these prolonged shortages.
I think that shows to me that the true power is now in the East. We spoke about Russia earlier on, and they really have the power if they really wanted to, dare I say, cripple the people in Ukraine in terms of lack of energy. And here we're seeing China, who's, I mean, to make and sell a chip for 3 cents is incredible in modern day and age. But the fact that they can retaliate, and it's a case of a 50 times price increase. I don't care what business you run in, that's a hell of an overhead jump uh, by 50 times. And again, to me, it just shows that a lot of power with regards to energy, with regards to politics, is shifting or has already shifted over to the east. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
No, not at all. I mean, on the one hand, whenever there's an opportunity like that, you can assume that companies will see that and they will try to seize this opportunity and fill that market gap. But especially with something like rare earths, that's really hard. So in the past, I think roughly 10 years ago, there was one company, I forget the name, in the US that wanted to start rare earths refining.
Mhm.
And then China just flooded the market and destroyed the price, and this company went bankrupt. So it seems like whatever the West tries to do, if they don't step up their game, if they don't use the same tricks that China uses, then they will lose out. And if they, at this point, try to threaten China with whatever sanctions they believe they can enforce, this will always fire back. So you have to do you have to do what China did. They for decades they built up this capacity. They threatened no one, and now that they can use this lever, they use it. And the West, especially Europe, does the exact opposite. They they use threats that everyone knows they can't execute.
And just to quote this out of the your article, and again, I'll link to this article so people can go read it for themselves. And I find this incredible, but I'll read it and I quote: Beijing didn't just show it has leverage over the West, it turned the situation to its advantage in ways few anticipated. As German firms wrestled with China's export rules on rare earths, they handed over sensitive supply chain information that could later be used to squeeze manufacturers or shut down production lines in Europe. Because to obtain licenses, Chinese officials demanded detailed data on materials, processes, and customers, which gives Beijing a live map of Europe's industrial weak points. End quote. I know you've also then linked to Bloomberg afterwards. But again, we'll go back to the common theme here, shooting themselves in the foot. So now this China has this information, from German firms they can map out everything and they can completely use that to their own advantage because of, I want to say, stupidity or ignorance on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to admire China actually, to what degree, to what extent they use their leverage, how they ask companies to fill out these forms so they get these export licenses. It's really such a lack of strategic thinking on the side of Europe's players. And again, I think it ties back to this lack of realist thinking. They don't think first what's best for the country. They think in terms of these values, but it's values that they can't project on the world because they lack the power. And the only viable option Europe now has is to be non-confrontative and to be transactional with both the US and with China, to somehow find their way through this, because both China and to some extent the US still need Europe. China exports 500 billion worth of goods per year to Europe, and I assume the US still needs Europe as a strategic partner, as a counterweight to Russia and the East, and China as well. So if they were clever, then they would try to position themselves in the middle and not cause too much friction for themselves. But again, they do the exact opposite.
I, and the amount of gaslighting is nothing short of incredible. And I'm referring to, of course, the again Ursula von der Leyen with the Resource EU plan and the fact that they are looking to overcome the energy crisis. But by doing that, they're promising a full phase out of Russian energy and doubling down on hydrogen fantasies, which, of course, as you and I know, and I'm sure most people listening know that if you continue to go down that route, you're going to see even higher energy prices. So yeah, the amount of gaslighting is just, it's ongoing and it never ceases to amaze me at all.
Yes, it's mind-boggling, and the thing that can is really worrisome is the idea that they people like von der Leyen and so on, they want to fight disinformation, and you wonder at what point they believe people spread disinformation. Maybe in the future they'll saying that hydrogen is unworkable. Maybe that will be disinformation, and you won't be allowed to say that. So this is a really a scary development, um, and it totally neglects how or ignores how we got here, how society evolves, that you need to have these different viewpoints and different ideas that need to be tested. And if you limit the things people can say, then you totally destroy this process, this evolutionary process. It's essentially a computational problem.
Hmm.
You can't have a couple of people decide what's right and what's wrong because the world's way too complex for a handful of people to make this decision. And if you ossify a system like that, then the system will eventually die. So it's all a very dangerous development um, and way to view the world, which will harm all of us in the long run.
Again, absolutely. I totally agree with that. I think that, as with many things in life, we've got to try and find a balancing act and a fine line. And I think what we've seen from certain, whether it's certain media outlets, as we've referred to here today, or certain parts of the world, again, the amount of gaslighting, and then if something's not right, the amount of doubling down is just incredibly narcissistic. I don't have another word for it, and I think it spells danger. And I think that, yeah, I don't want to be too, doom and gloom, but it does spell danger. And I think that again, the joy of doing this recording, and I want to thank you again for your time, Brewster, is that we get our truth out there. We get the truth out there, and that we get as many people listening as we can so that they can make up their own minds and do what works best for them. But please do be aware that if you are within the continent of Europe at the moment, then the chances are it's certainly going to be a case of a couple of steps back before hopefully then a couple of steps forward. And that's with regards to, not just energy, but, socio-economics as well. Broadstart, I always like to give people the opportunity to say how, people can get in touch with you, how you can be found. So please do tell us more about your work and where people can get in touch.
Yeah, so you can find all my writing on Substack. You can just enter the URL. It's thebrawlstreetjournal.com. It will redirect you to the Substack, and that's where you find my weekly articles. I'm also on Twitter, but I'm not that active there. But yeah,
Perfect. Perfect. Well,
yeah.
as usual, as I said, I will link to that in the show notes as well. I'll also link to the two articles that we have mentioned. I will point out that both those articles are free to read, so I'm not aware of any paywall there. So again, I'd urge people to go and read them. Oh, Brewster, again, wonderful. Thank you for your time. We've covered a lot, and I look forward to catching up again in 2026.
Thank you. It was very much fun.